It is a Tuesday afternoon, and if you were anywhere on the internet yesterday, you already know the entire ecosystem of celebrity gossip hit a brick wall going 90 miles an hour, and I am honestly still picking up pieces of my timeline from the floor. Let me paint a picture for you, because unless you have been living under a rock with zero cell service, the name Harry Styles has been synonymous with one very specific, very exhausting, very decade-long debate about fashion choices, fruit metaphors, and the phrase queerbaiting, which has been thrown at this man like confetti at a parade he never asked to be in. For years, the conversation has been a stuck record, with critics and a very loud corner of the internet insisting that Harry's entire aesthetic, the pearls, the painted nails, the flamboyant Gucci suits that look like he raided a vintage grandmother's closet in the best way possible, was just a marketing gimmick, a carefully curated illusion to attract a certain demographic while never actually having to face the real-world consequences or realities of that identity. It was a narrative that had gotten so loud, so repetitive, and frankly, so unfair in its demands for a personal receipt that most of us just assumed the man would continue to smile, wave, sell out stadiums, and let the noise exist in a vacuum of his own unbothered aura. But then, Saturday Night Live happened, and I need you to understand something very clearly right now, because what transpired on live television was not a subtle hint, it was not a lyrical interpretation, and it was certainly not an accident. It was the equivalent of taking that entire conversation, printing it out, and then very calmly setting it on fire with a Bic lighter while looking directly into the camera lens of a nation that was not prepared for the sheer audacity of the moment. Now, let's rewind the clock just a bit to set the stage properly, because context here is everything, and honestly, the build-up to this moment was so perfectly engineered that I almost wonder if the man has a crystal ball tucked away in that feather boa collection of his. The episode of Saturday Night Live was already a high-stakes event. Harry was pulling double duty as both the host and the musical guest, a gig that is notoriously stressful and has broken lesser mortals who are not accustomed to the manic energy of live sketch comedy. The monologue was charming, the singing was, as always, impeccable, but it was the specific sketch titled Sarah Lee that was about to become ground zero for a cultural shift. The premise was simple enough, a corporate workplace training video about the frozen dessert company. Sarah Sherman, who is a chaotic genius in her own right, and Harry are playing these aggressively bland, polo shirt-wearing employees tasked with demonstrating appropriate office behavior. The whole thing is built on that awkward, stilted corporate vibe where everyone is smiling but no one is happy, and you can practically smell the stale coffee and printer ink through the screen. But here is where the dopamine hits start stacking up in a way that even a seasoned neurosurgeon would be impressed by, because the first micro payoff in this saga is watching Harry Styles, arguably the most famous and fashionable pop star on planet Earth, completely commit to looking like a guy named Brad who manages a mid-level paper supply account and has strong opinions about the break room thermostat. It's disarming, it's funny, and it lowers your defenses completely. You're sitting there thinking, yes, a harmless little sketch about corporate monotony, and you are so blissfully unaware that in about 90 seconds, you're going to need to pause the video to physically process what your retina has just absorbed. The scene shifts, and the training video announcer introduces the concept of inclusivity in the workplace, a phrase that is usually followed by a 45-minute HR slideshow that everyone pretends to pay attention to. Harry's character is paired with Sherman's character for a role-playing exercise about how to treat a coworker who has a same-gender partner. This is where the tempo changes. The air in the studio, according to the vibe I was getting through my very expensive and very necessary television screen, became electric. They start the scenario, Sarah Sherman leans in, and according to reports from the live audience and the subsequent avalanche of stunned tweets, the kiss that happened next was not a peck. It was not a stage kiss where you turn your head so the camera sees the back of your hair. No, this was a full, unabashed, committed, and I mean fully committed, on-air embrace that broke several cardinal rules of television. And here's the detail that sent the internet into a full-scale meltdown that, according to sources on the SNL floor, the kiss was completely unscripted. That's right, this was not in the dress rehearsal. Sarah Sherman has since, in her own wonderfully unhinged way, confirmed that the move was a surprise and that Harry, ever the professional, simply went with it. And I mean, he really went with it. This is the second major dopamine hit, the realization that you are witnessing something that is not performative in the way we usually define pop star behavior. This was raw, live television improvisation. And if you think that's the end of the analysis, oh no, we're just getting to the part that makes this a masterclass in shutting down a specific kind of internet cynicism.
Let's talk about the aftermath of those 2 seconds, because if the kiss was the earthquake, the dialogue that followed was the tsunami that wiped the queerbaiting discourse off the map. After they separate, and while the audience is still screaming with a mixture of shock and delight, Harry's character delivers a line that was clearly in the script, but now, because of what just happened, it lands like 1,000 pounds of bricks. He turns to the camera with that slightly dazed but earnest look and says, "I'm not gay, I'm not straight, I'm not bi, I'm not anything. I'm just a guy who loves dessert." And then, in the most perfect comedic and psychological rug pull of the year, he and Sherman proceed to absolutely demolish an entire Sara Lee pound cake with their bare hands like 2 raccoons who just discovered an unlocked dumpster behind a Michelin-starred bakery. Now here is where my first-person, slightly sarcastic but ultimately impressed human opinion comes roaring in. I have seen a lot of celebrities try to navigate the tricky waters of public perception regarding sexuality. It's usually a mess. It's either a carefully worded statement from a PR team written in Times New Roman and posted to an Instagram story that expires in 24 hours, or it's an obtuse song lyric that fans have to decode like they're cracking the Enigma code. But this was different. This was a guy covered in vanilla frosting and crumbs looking into the lens of a show watched by millions and essentially saying, "You want a label? Here's your label. I'm a guy who likes sweets." End of conversation. The humor here isn't mean-spirited, it's the absurdity of it all. The man literally used a frozen pound cake as a metaphor for his entire existence, and frankly, it's the most relatable thing I've ever seen. We've all been there, emotionally speaking, even if we weren't on national television at the time. And this is where the loop closes on the years of queerbaiting allegations, and it's a closure that feels surprisingly satisfying. For years, the allegation was that Harry's public persona was a costume of ambiguity, a refusal to confirm or deny anything that would allow him to maintain a massive, diverse fan base. But what this SNL sketch did was, according to those analyzing the cultural impact, take the power back from the interrogation room. By engaging in a same-gender kiss that was so wildly, enthusiastically enthusiastic, and then immediately following it with a scripted, intentionally vague and humorous dismissal of labels, Harry managed to do something rare. He separated the action from the identity in a way that was both clear and chaotic. He showed that he's comfortable enough in his own skin to kiss a man on live TV for a laugh, but he also reaffirmed that his comfort level does not require him to hand over a notarized certificate of his internal romantic map to the public. It's a level of nuance that social media usually devours alive, but because it was wrapped in the absurdity of smashing a dessert with his fists, the medicine went down smooth. The curiosity gap that is now left open for the rest of us is a much more interesting one. Not what is Harry Styles hiding, but rather, why do we feel so entitled to the interior lives of people we don't know? It's a heavier question, sure, but it's the one that lingers after the sugar high wears off. Let's be real for a second, because the internet's reaction to this is a story in and of itself, and it's a textbook case of what happens when a pre-planned narrative meets the brick wall of reality. Within seconds of the sketch airing on the East Coast feed, social media platforms became a battleground of hot takes, but the tide was overwhelmingly one-sided. You had one faction of viewers who were simply in it for the ship, the Larry Stylinson conspiracy theorists who have been writing fanfiction about Harry and Louis Tomlinson for over a decade. They predictably treated this as a State of the Union address and proof that their manifesto was right all along. But then you had the other, much louder and more interesting group, the people who have been critical of Harry's ambiguity. And I have to say, watching that specific corner of the internet try to process this event was like watching a computer divide by zero. How do you call a man a queerbaiter when he literally just locked lips with a woman on live TV in a way that left zero room for the no homo joke that usually follows such things? The argument instantly lost its footing. The foundation crumbled because the action was so bold and so transparently not about sexual gratification or a coming out moment, it became solely about comedy and trust in a scene partner. It short-circuited the algorithm of outrage. This is the aha moment for the audience at home watching the drama unfold on Twitter. You could almost hear the collective sound of goalposts being moved across the digital field. Suddenly, the conversation had to shift from "he won't confirm anything" to, well, what does he actually owe us? And the answer, as demonstrated by a man wiping buttercream off his chin, is absolutely nothing except maybe a good time and a catchy tune. Now, I want to pivot slightly to the professional angle of all this, because we often forget that at the center of these viral moments is a human being doing a job, and Harry Styles, love him or find him baffling, is undeniably good at his job. The fact that Sarah Sherman felt comfortable enough to improvise that kiss speaks volumes about the kind of atmosphere he creates on set. In the world of live sketch comedy, surprising a host like that is a massive risk. If the host flinches or pulls back or looks visibly uncomfortable, the entire bit falls apart, and you've just created a week's worth of bad press for the show and for the guest. But Sarah Sherman, who is known for her fearless and often grotesque physical comedy, knew something about Harry that the rest of us only suspected. The guy is a professional. He's been doing this since he was 16 years old. He has the reflexes of a cat and the stage presence of someone who has literally grown up under a microscope. He didn't flinch. He leaned in. That's not just good acting. That's a testament to his character and his lack of ego in a world that tries to force-feed ego down your throat every 15 minutes. My own personal, positive, and slightly biased opinion here is that this moment should be studied in media training courses for the next 20 years. It's the ultimate yes and of improvisational fame. The public asked for clarity, he gave them Sarah Lee. The critics asked for action, he gave them a kiss that looked like it was listed from a 1950s romantic drama, albeit with more tongue than the Hays Code would have ever permitted. It was, in a word, brilliant. And while we're still catching our breath and wiping the